welcome to my series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision, and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is a distinguished Indian writer who writes in Kannada. He burst into the literary firmament in the late 1960s with the book Samskara, and has since then swept, literally, literary circles by his passion, the power of his writing, his eloquence, and his deep convictions. He's been president of the Sahitya Academy, he's the chairperson of the Film and Television Institute of India, he's won the Jnanpith Award. He has been widely honored, more than I could possibly recount in this brief introduction. I'm delighted to welcome poet, writer, novelist, essayist, you are Ananthamurthy. Professor Ananthamurthy, you studied at Oxford, you studied at Birmingham, you did your PhD in English literature and comparative literature. You write in Kannada. You have a sensibility that is rooted in that tradition of the language in which you write in. You're an Indian writer. Why is writing in your own language and writing in Kannada so important and so significant still at a time when everybody seems to be scrambling to study English?
English is important, It's not to deny the importance of a language like English, which is an window into the world. But my window into my inner self is my language. Why? Because it's the language of my childhood. I grew up in that language. All the important memories of my knowing who I am, belongs to that language. And if I use that language, there are no discontinuities, no discontinuity with my own childhood, no discontinuity with my own people, my own relations, my own villagers, and then I can belong to the world as well. Whereas if I wrote in English, there would be a gap, a certain discontinuity with my own earlier life.
I also meant in the sense that a language is close to the sort of the rhythms of the people, the ideas of the people, culture, identity. It represents so many different facets of the human personality, of social interactions, even sort of the sounds have reflections in local ambience and local traditions. With globalization, with the merging of identities, in a sense of nationalism, national boundaries perhaps disappearing to be replaced by economic ones, what is the significance of language per se, not just as a writer, but why is it important for a community? Why is it important for children to be taught their mother tongue? And why not just move on to English? It's now the language of success, of commerce, of discourse. So it's trying to get into the sort of the subtext of why language is so important.
Well, each language has its own memory. I mean, my memory of at least 1,000 years, is embedded in my language. It is immediate to me. I may acquire other kinds of memory through history, but it's not immediate. When I use a certain word in Kannada, that word has a memory. As it was used by a writer 500 years ago, that is true of English too, for those who have the English language as their language. So language connects you sometimes to your own past in an immediate sort of way, not in a thoughtful manner, but in an existential manner. That's one. And the second is you belong immediately to a people. You see, when you write in a language, you have an immediate audience. Particularly our Vachana poets of the 12th century, who did not write their poetry, but who spoke. Vachana is that which is spoken. Must have spoken to an immediate audience. Do you know why I say that? A language used 800 years ago is still the language we use now. Whereas 800 years ago, if somebody sat down to write a poem as such, the language was different. It was slightly artificial. That means, there was an immediate audience. So a lot of literature in my language has that kind of a reader-audience relationship. I don't get it in English. I don't get it in any other language. I would say that all languages of the world have something very unique about them, which when they are lost, a whole civilization is lost. And I don't think we should allow that to be lost. But you know, in our country, I don't use the word mother tongue in our country. You know, in Europe, mother tongue means mother tongue. I say that in India we have a house tongue, a street tongue, an upstairs tongue. A house tongue. For instance, you know, quite a few Tamil people who settle down in Karnataka begin to write in Kannada. So Kannada becomes their language. And Kannada people who have settled down in Tamil Nadu may write in Tamil.
So I have a sense of what street tongue is, but what is the tongue that comes from up there?
It used to be Sanskrit once, now English. So we needed all the three tongues. So India was that way, lived in an ambience of languages. But the language of the province which you adopted, if it was not your mother tongue, still became your tongue, because you did not lose the house tongue, the language which you used at home. So there was a lot of interactions, you know. That's why I don't want to bring in the mother tongue phenomenon into this, but the language used in your environment.
We'll come right back to that in a moment. You're watching a conversation with the writer, intellectual, philosopher, poet, U. R. Ananthamurthy. We'll be right back after a short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to a continuing conversation with U. R. Ananthamurthy. You're an educationist. You've been Vice Chancellor of the Mahatma Gandhi University. You were with the President of the National Book Trust, involved in many ways with books and education. You know, recently you've talked about the need, the imperative of what you've described as common schools, and how inequities in education are having very serious consequences and implications, for us as a community. There is a sort of perception that the apex of the pyramid in India in terms of education is very good and excellent, but the base is very meager and futile. What for you is a good education, relevant to 2005 plus, and what would be the aspiration for the common schools?
I went to a common school. What does it matter in my own life? I come from a very orthodox family. So when I went to the school, I had to wear a shirt to the school. I would come back home, remove my shirt and put it on a nail and wear something else at home. And I think I became a writer because I wore that shirt. That shirt brought me close to boys and girls of other castes. What I didn't have in my house, I had in my school. Now there are so many private schools, and children who are well-to-do go to private schools, English medium, and poor children go to the government schools, the public schools or common schools, and the children are separated, which is not good for India, which is very bad for India. That didn't happen in my own case, because we went to the same kind of school. Today I would say that almost all the Indian writers like me who write went to common schools, and hence they preserve their language as well. Because if you don't use as a medium your language, at least up to the 10th standard, not later on, your language becomes just a kitchen language. One. The ideal thing so for me is medium of instruction should be the language of the region. But every child must learn English. Why? Because English has become now a means through which you enter into the modern world system. There are some advantages. And so only the rich should not have those advantages, even the poor should. At one time it was Sanskrit. And the poor and the ordinary, the people who spoke all these languages, acquired Sanskrit. Sanskrit came into our language. A lot of Sanskrit has come into Kannada. A lot of Sanskrit has come into Malayalam. So thereby, Sanskrit was domesticated. We need to domesticate English now, make it our own. And the best way is to learn English as a Kacha language even, from the first standard, but have our medium of instruction in our own languages. Thereby you are not lost either to the modern world system or to your own region. I think that is possible. Many of us are examples of that kind of an upbringing.
Well, tell me that in terms of the writing in India, what does it today tell us about the state of the nation? There is a perception, and I think that's largely with urban elites in the language of the cinema and the language of theatre. That's sort of in the popular domain, that we tend to lack intellectual rigor in our writing, that it doesn't really have a place in the world stage. I mean, not since Ray and Tagore really have we had a global presence of powerful writing that has significantly made an impact. Do you agree with this assessment?
In all literary traditions, there are ups and downs. I would say now, Latin American writers are greater than any European writer for me. Europe had its peak, and now Latin America has. Toward the end of the 19th century, it was Russia, not any other country. So too, there are ups and downs in literary traditions.
In what ways is it reflective of what is happening in society, in the nation, in the culture of that language?
But that is not true of the Indian languages. I would say the Indian languages now are in a very interesting phase. I put it this way: in all languages, literatures have a backyard and a front yard. And the front yard is the yard of classical perceptions and educated experience of the educated people. The backyard is the experience of the Shudra, the downtrodden, the forgotten, the oppressed. All the Indian languages have a vast backyard which contains folklore, oral epics which are not even recorded, modes of speech which have not yet come into the literary world, whether it is in Marathi or Kannada or Tamil. There are a lot of Dalits writing, the backwards writing. This doesn't happen in English. English has only a front yard, no backyard.
In fact, your great achievement as a writer has been, I suppose, one way of putting it is to bringing backyard issues into the front yard and making that a part of a discourse, of making people sit up and look at the issues that were traditionally in the backyard and have them made into films and be translated and to be widely disseminated. What was it sounds like a very simplistic question, but what was the secret of the success of that? Not the fact that you articulated it, but that it was also being received, and people are reading it and responding to it because they see passion, they see integrity, and I think they see a great deal of conviction, not just of you as a writer, but but the life that you live. So, what is the secret of good writing and good writing that's also read?
The backyard has to be integrated with the front yard, and the front yard has to take cognizance of the backyard. That happens continuously in good writing all over the world. Even in English, the best writing that comes in English is from what was the backyard of British Empire, you see, from India, from Africa, and from Ireland at one time. It was Yeats and Joyce from Ireland, who enriched the English language. So this happens all the time, and our languages have a vast backyard, all the languages, whether it is Hindi or Bengali or Kannada or Tamil. So you have new movements of self-expression.
Well, you were sort of part of this thing called, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, the Navya movement, the movement in new writing. Now that's sort of 30 years old. How new is it? At that time it created a great sensation. It drew upon existentialism. It drew upon. I have to sort of confess my complete ignorance I don't know how Indian at that time in history existentialism was, and we've sort of, with our Western education, we've normally associated it more with Europe than with India, at least in this century.
But now it is not new in that sense. There is a new now, and that is women's writing. And quite a few backward classes, who have emerged as good writers, they always bring new experience into writing, new material. And if they are good, a new way of writing as well. Yes, because in writing, if you bring new material, it is not enough. It should be formally new also. Only when aesthetically it is new, it becomes a new experience, a real new experience. That is happening in my language. Some of the best writing today in my language are from young short story writers. And some of them are brilliant, really good. I would say world class when it gets known. But the more genuine the writing, the more difficult it is to translate. And hence, the rest of the world may not even come to know of it. That doesn't matter. In literature, only because something is known, it doesn't mean that it is good. Even something which is not known at all may be good in itself and can wait for many more years to get known. That happened to Hopkins. Hopkins was never honored in his own time. That happened to Blake. Blake had to wait another century to be known as perhaps the greatest poet of his times. That may be happening in the Indian languages as well, because today with globalization and so on, I think writing has become less important.
And yet, ironically, that people have been predicting the doom of writing for for decades, and yet writing survives. Books sells and publishing grows. What is the secret of that? It sort of seems to defy logic in many ways. That when radio came, they thought writing would disappear. When film and television, that they would all threaten writing. We talk about the short attention spans that television cultivates. And yet, there are more and more books being published, and people continue to read. What is the charm of reading, and why do you think it survives?
When I begin to read, what is most fascinating is you begin to look inward. It begins to talk to your inner self. And a certain kind of honesty for us with ourselves is possible, I think, the maximum when we read. When we socially interact, we try to be good and gentle and all the virtues, which are required of us. But while writing, while reading, you can confront even with the ugliest of yourself. I think the humankind will always need that kind of a cleansing, spiritual cleansing, which is possible when you read a great writer. When you read a Tolstoy, for instance, you confront the violence within yourself. It's a great cleansing process. So it has the quality of meditation, yes,
Well, on that count, we'll take a short break. We'll be right back. Don't go away. You're watching a conversation with U.R. Ananthamurthy. Welcome back to a continuing conversation with U.R. Ananthamurthy. You have been, wearing several hats apart from that of being a writer, which you see as your primary vocation, and a teacher. And we've mentioned the National Book Trust, the Film and Television Institute of India, the Sahitya Academy. So in a sense that you are more than a writer, and you have been with the People's Union for Civil Liberties. It's writer as activist, someone who also decides, chooses to go and do something about the issues that he feels passionately about beyond writing about it. How important and how necessary, how valuable has this role of an activist as an adjunct to being a writer been for you?
Primarily, I feel I am a citizen. It has never occurred to me that the two are very different. I mean, I act and then I reflect. When I am writing, I am much more objective. I have a need to withdraw into myself, because a lot of action also involves your ego and all that. But somehow writing is purer to me, than this. or at least there is an opportunity for you to see the whole thing. So it is one continuous act, one need, and you are not always a writer. Particularly in my case, I can write only when I get a metaphor. I wait. It is something like, the emotions within me have to mature, wait for a certain maturity within myself and then emerge. It takes a long time. I have to tear it up and then write again. And then when I hit a metaphor, then I can go beyond myself.
So in what ways does this I assume in some ways you're pointing to this sense of catharsis, that a metaphor and an emotion turns into a metaphor which needs expression. And then at the point that it needs expression and it develops this momentum that it has no choice but to sort of come out, it may be initially chaotically and then takes form and structure and then is modified and improved. How does it vary between writing a poem and writing a novel and writing a short story or an essay, the different kinds of things that you write about?
Yeah.
So when does that metaphor begin to take on an aesthetic, begin to take on the choosing that this is a novel, this is going to lead to this, it's going to lead to this? What happens?
When I write, sometimes I do not know whether I'm going to write a poem or a story or a novel. What starts as a poem can become a story, and depends on how much it can grow. But more important than all that, how much it can include the opposite of itself. That's a very important thing. In good writing, you are not only projecting a point of view, but you are making room for its opposite also to be a part of it, to complement it. Because then a full experience for a reader, not when. And this capacity to include the other half. Shakespeare had it abundantly, the others. He could give as much expression to Goneril as to Cordelia, both. That capacity, and a writer doesn't have always. A good metaphor is one which allows him to, or her, to include the other half. And when it includes much more, it may become a novel, because a novel is something like a Hold All also. It is more leisurely, but a short story is more like a poem. So that's a different kind of an experience, when you. And there is one more thing in writing. It should not be manipulative, because a writer has some capacity to use words to manipulate the mind of the reader. If I manipulate you and catch you, hold you for a while, when you come out of me, you will just reject me, after that.
So you're really saying it's just the power of integrity, transparency, conviction that must communicate, and that you don't really manage the.
No, there's
writing.
a lot of writing which manages also. That's where one makes a distinction.
I guess that's sort of what's popular, popular fiction that you read in flights and that you just sort of churn around rapidly. For someone who's been, it was 1966, I think, this big novel came up. It's been, 40 odd years. What has been the journey for you? What has been the achievement since that bursting on the firmament and keeping it alight? Is that a problem? Because you are Ananthamurthy. You're not sort of an ordinary man now that we talk to. You're someone who that many years ago came up there as a reputation, as a legend, as an icon. Does that put a sort of pressure on you that next book you come up with has got something to live up to?
First I critiqued tradition. I was in love with the modernity. But as I have gone on, I have begun to critique modernity now. So in my own lifetime, I have seen both. There are three hungers in all of us writers in the 20th century. One is the hunger for equality, the other hunger is hunger for the spiritual realm, and the third is the hunger for modernity. the two hungers, modernity as well as spirituality, come from the hunger for equality, which you first see in Mahatma Gandhi, when he is thrown out of the train. So many of us, when we began to write, we had this hunger for modernity, to belong to the modern world system, to have all the benefits of Europe. Why? Because we wanted to be equal. And then also we wanted to go beyond religion into a kind of a spiritual realm. And now we are in a globalizing world where modernity has taken the ugly shape of the globalizing economy. And so now I don't have the same notion about tradition which I had when I wrote Samskara. I have begun to revisit that side and question myself again. So it is not really writing one book, but another book arising out of that book, which critiques that book, doesn't approve of many things, which I said in the beginning. So I have been continuously asking myself questions. And many of my generation do so, because they have all gone through my kind of a journey in many languages, I think.
Your writing has embodied, so much spirituality, pretty much, from the outset. So at this point in your life, with 20, 30 years of, writing ahead of you, and the hindsight of it, what is your aspiration for yourself?
I don't know. I react to situations. There are so many moral challenges for us, in India. I just go on reacting and talking about it, sharing and sometimes I am able to write something like I did some 20 years ago, and all that I feel about globalizing, etc., was metaphor there, in a story which I wrote a few years ago. I call it, it has been translated as Stallion of the Sun, which was very important for me. I have said many things which I feel now in that story. So I wait again, for some expression of that kind where I can unburden myself. You have to wait for it. You have to meditate about that. You have to be pure. Somewhere, keep all your senses pure. But we get very opinionated as we go on, and opinions are the biggest shatru, enemy of creativity, being opinionated. And we get so easily opinionated, particularly if you are an activist. One of the dangers of being an activist is you get opinionated, and you have to come out of it, even to be a good activist.
So, Dr. Ananthamurthy, thank you very much. This has been a great honor and a privilege, and may you be unopinionated for a very, very long time and keep writing. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.